Hi everyone, Dr. Suneel Dhand. Well, what is happening? What am I doing here in my tie? Well, I'm making this completely unplanned video, having just driven home from work. I had a long day in the hospital. I always like to dress up for my patients. I believe in wearing a tie whenever I'm rounding on the hospital floors. But anyway, there I was after a long day of work, and I'm driving home, and I got some fantastic news, which was relayed to me, as it is nowadays, via my phone. President Trump, President-elect Trump, has nominated Robert F. Kennedy, RFK, to be the Health and Human Services Secretary. And this doctor, at least, is delighted. You will undoubtedly hear from a stream of medical professionals and experts on the mainstream news about how outraged they are, their moral indignation. But I believe that this represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to turn around America's health. And boy, do we need it turned around. And I will share with you first the statement that was made by President Trump. I'm going to read it to you here. It says, "I am thrilled to announce Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services, HHS, so he has been nominated. For too long, Americans have been crushed by the industrial food complex and drug companies who have engaged in deception, misinformation, and disinformation when it comes to public health," Trump said in his announcement on Thursday, today. My goodness, what a thing to say. I never thought that I would hear anything like this from the top of the United States government, or soon-to-be government. "The safety and health of all Americans is the most important role of any administration. Too right it is. And HHS will play a big role in helping ensure that everybody will be protected from harmful chemicals, pollutants, pesticides, pharmaceutical products, and food additives that have contributed to the overwhelming health crisis in this country." My goodness. When I read that coming from a president, or it's a bit confusing now, President Trump now, he's actually President-elect Trump. When I heard that from President Trump, it almost brought tears to my eyes. I never thought we would hear such a thing. So I responded in a tweet. By the way, those of you who are on Twitter, please be sure to follow me. So I responded in a tweet, "For a president to say this is a new dawn in America. Thank you, President Trump." His handle on Twitter is Real Donald Trump. He doesn't post much on Twitter. He usually uses his own Truth Social account, but he did post this statement on Twitter, or at least one of his staff did. "I've lived in the USA for almost 20 years, and I've seen the entire population get sicker and sicker. This represents a new opportunity to focus on root causes of the metabolic health crisis our nation faces. I never thought I would see this day. Go, Robert Kennedy Jr. The corrupt medical establishment, which profits so much from people being sick, will be shaking in their money-filled boots." I really do mean that. And I'm probably one of the few doctors that you will see or hear from who is absolutely thrilled with this announcement. And I'm going to explain why. Let me have a sip of my tea. This is usually what I do when I get home from work. Make a cup of tea, good cup of tea. Of course, I'm British, so we put milk in it. And I usually put a few Indian spices in it as well, but my favorite is Earl Grey tea. But anyway, let's get back to the main story here. So why is this so important, and why am I a bit emotional seeing this? Those of you who followed me for some time know that this is my main area of passion: health, well-being. I also work as a health coach. I'm a qualified, certified personal trainer. I believe in health and well-being. And what we've witnessed over the last few decades, but it's accelerated over the last 10 years, is nothing short of a complete catastrophe. It's a disaster. And if we carry on down this road, believe me, if we think things are bad now, wait another 10 years. We're now in a situation where I heard almost 50% of youngsters, adolescents, now have pre-diabetes. There's a 50% overweight and obesity rate, which goes with pre-diabetes. We have soaring rates of chronic illness. Every year, the population is getting sicker and sicker. More and more people are on drugs, and I see this. I mainly deal with the elderly population, and it pains me the amount of older people that are getting sicker all the time. They keep pouring toxins into their body, and I don't blame them. People might know the basics of what is a good food to eat and what is a bad food to eat, but when we have no message from the top, then what do you expect? And meanwhile, why this is so sickening, as the population gets sicker, they get more inflamed, they get more obese, they get more diseases. Huge segments of the establishment keep on profiting from this absolute crisis. And it's especially bad when you think so many youngsters now are getting sick. And I know that this is a huge platform of what Robert Kennedy Jr. is all about, beating the chronic disease pandemic in kids. Pandemic is too soft a word. So I'm very happy that somebody who is so focused on these issues, make America healthy again is his slogan, is now in a position where he can really have some influence. So let's think about this more. Robert Kennedy Jr., he's been around for a long time. He's a household name. And the mainstream media, in their outrage, is going to go on about all of his more maybe controversial stances. And my line of thinking is this. There are no two people in the world who agree. I don't agree with every single thing that RFK says. You put two professionals in a room, they will never agree on absolutely everything. But I'm willing to give a lot of that a pass because he is so focused on what I believe is the major issue facing the country. I'm a citizen now of the United States. I'm invested in this country, and it pains me as a doctor. I don't want to see people sick. I want people to be well. I tell people when I'm in the hospital, I want you to get better, I want you to leave, and I don't want you to get sick. And I always try to give some basic common sense lifestyle advice, and that is what is so missing from the national debate. And I find it so interesting. I already heard a few doctors now. All these mainstream media outlets will bring on their experts, doctors, academic professors, with their outrage at RFK, talking about how this is an affront, how this is a threat to America's health. What an absolute joke. These people who are in charge have presided over this unprecedented metabolic health disaster. And it's going to ultimately bring the country down. Going back to me loving this country, I'm sure most of you love this country. Economically, this is not sustainable when so many people are getting sick because of a toxic environment. So when you see all these experts on television, or if they're quoted in articles, talking about their outrage, excuse me a moment, these people have presided over this catastrophe. What are they so outraged about? How could things possibly get any worse with RFK now that he actually wants to focus on some of these things? And we'll come back to some of these points that President Trump mentioned, which, by the way, is great because I don't think President Trump was actually big on many of these issues. So RFK has probably taught him a lot. And I hope, by the way, that he helps President Trump with some of his own issues with fast food and some of Trump's more, shall I say, less than good health habits, which are well documented because he is getting older as well. And of course, it's in the best interests of the country to have a healthy president. So I'm glad that President Trump is listening to some of these, but listen to what he said in his statement. Harmful chemicals, pollutants, pesticides, pharmaceutical products, and food additives. The crux of the situation is this, that over 70% of all calorie intake now in the United States is ultra-processed food. These are foods that our ancestors, who, by the way, didn't get diabetes, heart disease, they may have had other issues, but they didn't have the metabolic health disorders that we have today. People in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who are really suffering from high blood pressure, pre-diabetes, high cholesterol. It all has a unifying factor, and it's most of the time related to toxic food, which keeps spiking insulin levels, leading to insulin resistance. This is a whole different matter, but if we want to get to the science of it, hundreds of millions of people now, including kids, are walking around inflamed. They're under a process known as oxidative stress. Their mitochondria are not working properly. And the number one reason is we don't eat real food. Most of what we see in the supermarket is complete garbage. And this is part of what I coach on, what I teach on, what I've talked about so many times in my videos. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. Once you start reading ingredient labels and you realize that you're pouring absolute junk into yourselves. If you don't recognize what's on the ingredient labels, don't eat it. They put huge amounts of other fake substances, huge amounts of sugars, a big culprit right there, sugars into processed foods. You're better off eating from scratch and eating as pure as possible. This is simple common sense. Why would you want to pour chemicals into your body? All of these people in the mainstream establishment are all about, oh, you need studies, you need randomized control studies. They know damn well that studies are very hard to do in the field of nutrition. We have to exercise common sense. And we know that if we're putting these artificial foods into ourselves, then there's going to be a problem. So I am hopeful that RFK is going to get back to basics and he's going to put forward some guidelines. And don't underestimate the power of having somebody at the top. Everything from what children are eating in school to what adults are eating, if the right message is coming down, we can get the needle moving in the right direction. So do not listen when you hear this fake moral outrage from the mainstream media and medical experts. They have presided over a catastrophe. Which leads me on to my next point, which is the pushback that is going to occur. I recently did a talk on this, and part of the talk I'm actually going to post over the next few days on the enormous pushback to the Make America Healthy Again movement. And it pains me to say this as a doctor. I've obviously trained for many years. I went into medical school with noble intentions, I think, when I went to medical school, and that was also in the United Kingdom. There weren't so many obvious conflicts of interest. We didn't have 24-hour news, social media, etc. back then. Goodness me, I make it sound like I'm so old, but I'm not. But remember, social media is a relatively new invention. And it's become more prominent. In a way, it's a blessing because we can really see the conflicts of interest. But I believe they've got much worse over the last couple of decades. And it pains me to say that as a doctor, I don't believe that our leaders actually want the population to be well. If we look at every single level, all the way from our institutions, which we know in the United States are heavily corrupted. There is what we call regulatory capture of our three-letter agencies. Hopefully RFK can sort that out. You shouldn't be able to work for industry and big business if you work for public health. That should go without saying. Why should I even need to say that? But right now it's a revolving door of corrupt officials, and they're in relationships with big pharma, with big food. You can't have that happen. Then you go down a level to doctor societies who are absolutely terrible. Physician societies, medical associations, they're funded by pharmaceutical companies. They're funded by big food. And they're in a situation where, of course, they're not going to be loyal to the interests of your regular doctors who want to do a good job. They're not going to be looking out for the true health and well-being of the country. They want to satisfy their sponsors. And every year, pharmaceutical companies and big food are making more and more money. This big food problem that we have, hopefully RFK will address. Food corporations making trillions of dollars from their garbage fake foods. Pharmaceutical companies, I mean, nowadays, most pharmaceutical products that are made are to combat bad food. So why not address the food in the first place? It's ridiculous. I actually today spoke to a friend of mine, a very distinguished gastroenterologist from the UK who's in San Diego. And he said that every single billboard within a short space that he was walking was advertising a new drug for fatty liver disease. Fatty liver disease barely used to happen a few decades ago. We only used to see it in alcoholics. Now every other adult and a large number of kids are getting fatty liver disease because their livers are getting overwhelmed with bad food, they're overweight, and we have a disaster on our hands. And the pharmaceutical industry and medical industry thinks that the answer is to throw pharmaceutical products at people, and they are getting richer and richer. So expect huge pushback from some of the doctors, I'm sad to say at the top, some of the experts. The pharmaceutical industry is going to go all in. The mainstream media is going to do their usual thing. They're going to launch a huge campaign. They're probably going to focus on the few things that RFK may have said before, which were controversial, but they're going to neglect all of the good that he can do. That's what they're going to do. So we're going to see an attack on multiple fronts here from what I call the medical industrial complex. They do not want the population well. They don't want you and your family well. They want to profit off you. They view you as a profit center. It's very, very sad indeed. But we have to remember that this is what is going on. So expect an almighty pushback here from this medical industrial complex, which doesn't want the population to be well. They don't want hundreds of millions of people to go back to how people were in the 1960s and 70s. I mean, I've made this point before. Go back a few decades and people overseas will tell you that when they saw an American overseas, it was pretty much guaranteed that the American would look like the healthiest person in the room. This goes back to World War I, World War II even, because Americans were eating pure food, they were more active. But now the situation is very much completely reversed from that. Now, when you see an American overseas, they're probably the unhealthiest, sickest looking person. They're overweight, obese. Again, this is not to shame people, but it's to tell the truth. And they're probably loaded up with pharmaceutical products. This is not sustainable, my friends. This is going to bring the country down. And this is why we need somebody like RFK to really change things. So I am absolutely delighted. A lot of what RFK focuses on is going back to being as natural as possible. And that's always the way. It's very difficult to get anything better than our bodies, which are so perfectly designed. Whether you believe in God, whether you believe in nature, there is very little that can be improved upon in nature. And it's really an affront to nature when our bodies become sick because of a toxic environment. We pile more pharmaceutical products onto ourselves. I'm not saying that pharmaceutical products have no role. I'm saying that nowadays, I really believe that they do more harm than good when you look at what's going on, especially in the United States. So let's see what happens. This nomination from President Trump, RFK, if he is confirmed, the HHS, Health and Human Services Secretary, expect massive change from the top. Seriously, we are going to see big changes in messaging, and the country really stands to benefit. But do not forget that there is going to be huge pushback against this. I mean, even other segments of the medical establishment, insurance companies, you would think that they would have an interest in wanting people to be well, but they don't. So from them to the big business interests to doctor societies, they're all going to try to paint this movement in a negative light. And I hope that the forces of good in the end win over the forces of corruption and badness. Okay, everyone, I wanted to make that impromptu video. I will go and enjoy the rest of my evening, and let's hope that some good really comes out of this. This is about those of us who love this country and indeed the whole world, because the ripples will be felt all over the world. I hope the ripples spread to the United Kingdom, which is not far off where the USA is now, but the USA by far has probably the worst metabolic health catastrophe. All right, everybody, thank you for listening. Do feel free to comment down below. You can check out my other work. Oh, and speaking of being natural, for those of you who haven't already, please do check out my natural organic supplement, antioxidant, anti-inflammation, immune support supplement. I've got lots of good feedback for it so far. Thank you for that. And it is made in the USA, and we also worked with a company which is veteran owned. So that link is in the description down below. My other work is down below. Check out my website and my free newsletter. And we will speak again very, very soon.